and we're beginning to feel the negative impact of them right now. Hey, the outrage tonight comes courtesy of the VA. This shouldn't happen here. But good news before the show ends, courtesy of the Supreme Court. But we begin today with Harley-Davidson, Milwaukee, Wisconsin company, Harley-Davidson, who announced today that because of the president's tariffs, they are going to begin making some of their motorcycles outside of this country. To discuss this, once again, happy to be joined by Eric Boehm with Reason Magazine. Eric, thank you for taking some time. So, Harley-Davidson responding, it sure seems like, to the EU responding to Trump's tariffs on the EU. This isn't surprising, is it?
Thanks so much for having me back again, Joe. No, I mean, not necessarily surprising. I think we're going to see a lot more of this. This makes headlines because it's such an iconic brand, such an iconic American brand. I mean, Harley-Davidson, right? Made in the United States, the American motorcycle culture, all of that. But the announcement today, I guess not even so much an announcement as it was actually just something that they filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning, saying that Harley-Davidson saying that they intend to move some of their manufacturing operations out of the United States over to Europe to avoid these retaliatory tariffs that have been placed by the EU. As you said, this is a retaliation on the tariffs that the Trump administration has pursued against China, against Canada, against the EU, against basically all steel and aluminum imports into the United States. And after a few weeks or a couple of months, really, of back and forth, the EU decided just about a week or two ago to put retaliatory tariffs of 25% on a number of American goods. They're really going after like the iconic American cultural stuff here, right? So motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, blue jeans, stuff like that. So now you've got Harley-Davidson saying that, look, those extra costs, that's going to mean potentially $90 million to $100 million in added tariff costs for their consumers in Europe. And they say we don't feel comfortable pushing that cost onto our European consumers, so we're going to go build our bikes over there.
So, Eric, again, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm really not. And I've always struggled a little bit with economics. But if Harley-Davidson says, OK, we're going to go build motorcycles they've got plants in Brazil, India, Australia, and Thailand, does not that mean eventually a loss of American jobs for Harley?
Yeah. Oh, this absolutely. Well, I mean, I guess we shouldn't say it definitely means loss of American jobs. They haven't said that for sure, but I think the writing is clearly on the wall here. Yeah, I mean, there are people. I've heard this defense on Twitter and online today in response to a piece that I wrote about this, and the argument is, oh, well, look, Harley-Davidson has been offshoring jobs over the last few years anyway, and their U.S. sales are declining. Their sales are growing elsewhere. All of which is true. I mean, yeah, more people are buying motorcycles in India and in Southeast Asia and in Europe than are buying them here in the United States right now. But what does the president keep telling us, Joe? He keeps telling us that he wants companies to build things here, right? You've got a company in Harley-Davidson that, yeah, they do manufacturing in other places, but they do the bulk of their manufacturing here in the United States in plants in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and in Missouri. And they're doing what the president wants. They're building things here and shipping them overseas. But now, if you start putting up trade barriers, you make it harder for companies to do that, harder for American companies to do that. And so, Harley-Davidson has taken their jobs overseas. There are going to be other companies that aren't really even able to do what Harley-Davidson is doing. They're not going to be able to take their jobs overseas. They're just going to close up shop. These are the smaller companies. I highlighted again in the piece I wrote today, a company called Mid-Continent Nail Corporation. They're based in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. They only employ a couple hundred people, but they make steel nails. And the steel that they use is now going to be 25% more expensive. And they say, the owners of this company say that they're going to have to lay off 40% of their workforce because they can't compete with cheaper nails made in China and other places. So those jobs aren't going overseas. They're just going to disappear. But from the workers' perspective, it's the same thing. If you work for Harley-Davidson and your job gets moved to Belgium or to Norway, or if you work for the Mid-Continent Nail Company in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and they just close up shop, from your perspective, it's exactly the same.
No, and Eric, what I find fascinating about this Harley-Davidson story is soon after the president was elected, I remember President Trump and Vice President Pence, a bunch of Harleys. Harley came to the White House and they were sitting on and standing in front of these beautiful motorcycles. And President Trump comes out and tweets today, in effect, he wasn't doing this. I don't think tariffs are a good thing at all. How does this end? Or, as some of Trump's supporters say, this is just a bunch of bluster and these tariffs are nothing permanent. What's your read?
I guess my read would be that Trump supporters, maybe they know because they certainly seem to know bluster, right? But, I mean, all joking aside, that the tweet today from the president was an odd tweet because it was almost somewhat like reflective, which is not something you expect from Trump's tweets, right? I mean, rarely does he seem to have a bit of, a moment of self-reflection and self-doubt. I think where this goes from here is I think you're going to start seeing more headlines like this, not just about individual companies either making decisions to leave or to close up shop or lay people off, but you're going to have, like we had today, you're going to have bad days on the stock market that fairly or unfairly are going to be tied back to this policy because at least in some part, that's part of the overall American economic picture at the moment. And I think all of that combined is going to maybe put more pressure on members of Congress, specifically Republican members of Congress, to stand up to the administration. I saw today that Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, who's a Republican and I think a pretty free market minded Republican, who has said some things before about not thinking that tariffs are the right idea or sort of quietly criticized the Trump administration. Today he came out pretty forcefully in an article in Politico and said that we have now crossed the Rubicon, is the phrase that he used, and indicating that he thought it was time for he and his colleagues to stand up and push back against the Trump administration on this. And I think as you have more, Harley-Davidsons, if you have more big American brands, even if you have more small, even if you have more mid-continent nail corporations that have to lay people off, every one of those businesses is in some lawmaker's district. You know this, Joe. You were in Congress. If there was a business that was laying off 200 people in your district, you would know about it.
Yeah, Eric, what I hear from listeners to my TV and radio shows is, look, we've got to do something against China. China's been cheating on us for years. We have to punch back against China. But then why are we taking action against the EU, Canada, Mexico, the rest of the globe? How do you answer that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It doesn't make sense to go after our allies. It certainly doesn't make sense to start a trade war with Europe, a trade war that the president now seems to want to escalate. He's talking about putting tariffs on cars in response to these EU retaliatory tariffs. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. On the China point, I think most people have seriously considered this. Most economists, people who work in trade that I've talked to, will admit that China has been in some ways ripping us off or playing fast and loose with intellectual property, things like that. There are ways to go about trying to get them to change their behavior. We could go through the WTO, for example. There might be other ways to put pressure uniquely on China to change those policies. But tariffs are not going to accomplish that. What tariffs are taxes. They ultimately raise prices on American consumers and American businesses. The Chinese goods that American businesses won't be able to afford to buy anymore will just get sold to somebody else. China's going to keep making all that stuff. So it really is more of a tax on us than it is on China. I think the Trump administration kind of mixes up these two problems. There's the intellectual property problem with China, and there's the fact that they sometimes flout some of these international norms when it comes to trade. And then there's the trade deficit issue, which Trump seems to like to fixate on. And I think he just fundamentally misunderstands that. A trade deficit with China isn't really a problem because they run a capital deficit with us, and it all pretty much evens out in the end. I think the Trump administration doesn't clearly understand the problem they're trying to solve, and I don't think they've clearly outlined how this set of policies is going to solve that problem, because I've yet to hear anyone make a good argument for connecting A, B, and C. How does tariffs actually get China to change the things we want them to change? I don't know.
Yeah, hey, Eric, I really appreciate it, man. Always enjoy having you. Hopefully the Republicans will put some pressure on them. Hey, shame on us, America. This should never, ever happen here.